Poor secretary rents a boyfriend for $400. He's a billionaire CEO who changes her life. Her trembling finger hovered over the confirm payment button. $400 to rent a boyfriend for one weekend. The cost of genuine companionship in a world where even love had a price tag. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now let's get back to the story. The fluorescent light above Zara Williams' desk flickered like her dwindling hope, casting harsh shadows across the stack of overdue bills scattered between her keyboard and cold coffee. 27 years old, and this was her kingdom, a cramped corner desk in the administrative bullpen of Morrison & Associates, where dreams came to die under the weight of filing cabinets and copy machines that perpetually jammed. "Zara, I need those Johnson files copied and on my desk in 10 minutes, barked Mr. Peterson, her supervisor, his tie stained with what looked like lunch from 3 days ago. He didn't wait for her response, already turning toward his glass office where he could pretend to be important while she did the work that actually mattered. "Yes, sir," she whispered to his retreating back, her voice swallowed by the office's relentless hum. The same response she'd given 1,000 times before, each one chipping away another piece of her dignity. Her phone buzzed, a text from her best friend Maya, the only person who still checked on her regularly. "Girl, when's the last time you did something fun? Like really fun? You're becoming a ghost." Maya was right, of course. When was the last time Zara had laughed until her stomach hurt? When did she last felt beautiful, desired, worth someone's time? She couldn't remember, and that realization hit harder than the overdue rent notice. The answer came to her gradually, like a photo developing in a dark room. She'd been alone for 8 months now, ever since Jerome decided her lack of ambition wasn't compatible with his life goals. Translation, she wasn't making enough money to fit into his image of success. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Maya's best friend, the only person who still checked on her regularly. "Girl, when's the last time you did something fun? Like really fun? You're becoming a ghost." Maya was right, of course. When was the last time Zara had laughed until her stomach hurt? When did she last felt beautiful, desired, worth someone's time? She couldn't remember, and that realization hit harder than the overdue rent notice. The answer came to her gradually, like a photo developing in a dark room. She'd been alone for 8 months now, ever since Jerome decided her lack of ambition wasn't compatible with his life goals. Translation, she wasn't making enough money to fit into his image of success. Her best friend Maya's text appeared next. "There's this new thing, don't judge me, but you can literally rent a boyfriend for events and stuff, like a professional who actually treats you nice. Just saying, you deserve to feel special." Zara almost laughed. Rent a boyfriend? The absurdity of it struck her like a slap. Had she really fallen so far that she needed to pay someone to pretend to care about her? But as she sat there, surrounded by the soul-crushing beige of her daily existence, the idea didn't seem absurd anymore. It seemed hopeful. "Send me the link," she typed before she could stop herself. Across town, Daniel Richardson stood in his penthouse office, 47 floors above the city's chaos, watching people move like ants through streets he'd never walked. At 32, he commanded a business empire worth more than some small nation's GDP. But today, he felt like the loneliest man alive. "Mr. Richardson, the board is ready for your presentation," his assistant Carolyn announced through the intercom. "Tell them 5 more minutes," he replied, not turning from the window. He'd given the same presentation 100 times to 100 different rooms full of suits who nodded and smiled and saw dollar signs when they looked at him. Never him, just the potential return on investment he represented. His personal phone buzzed with a text from his brother Marcus. "When are you going to stop playing the part and start living your life?" "What life?" Daniel wanted to reply, but didn't. Marcus wouldn't understand. As the younger brother who chose teaching over business, Marcus had something his billions couldn't buy: authentic relationships with people who knew him, not his net worth. "Sir?" Carolyn's voice again. "Coming," he said, straightening his tie like armor. But as he walked toward the boardroom where another performance awaited Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He was tired of being a commodity, tired of relationships that felt like business transactions. Maybe it was time to remember what it felt like to be human. That evening, Zara sat in her studio apartment, if you could call 400 square feet of peeling paint and inconsistent heating an apartment. The website Maya had sent her glowed on her laptop screen. Companion Plus, professional companionship for the modern woman. The tagline made her cringe, but she kept reading. Tired of attending events alone? Need a reliable, attractive date who knows how to treat you right? Our certified companions are here to make you feel special. Certified companions? She almost closed the laptop. This was insane. But then she saw the testimonials. Photos of happy women with handsome men who looked like they genuinely cared. Even if it was fake, wouldn't fake caring be better than the real indifference she'd been living with? The price made her stomach drop. $400 for a weekend package. $400 she didn't have. $400 that could go toward rent or food or any of the dozen other necessities she couldn't afford. But when would she ever do something just for herself? When would she ever feel worthy of someone's attention, even if she had to pay for it? Her finger hovered over the confirm payment button. This was crazy. This was desperate. This is exactly what I need, she realized. Minutes later, the payment confirmation arrived in her inbox, along with the form to select her preferred characteristics. Height, between 5'10" and 6'2" feet. Build, athletic. Hair, dark brown or blonde. Personality, kind, sense of humor. In her frustration, she accidentally ticked the box for any available companion, which was standard operating procedure anyway. On Friday evening, Zara paced her immaculate, freshly straightened apartment, nervously clutching the $900 she'd borrowed from her underhanded boss. He'd laughed when she asked, but she hid his disdain to thank Philly profusely. What if she had made a mistake? Especially after the unexpected cancellation of an anti-contract that broke the heart of Lucy. He couldn't do anything about that either. At 7 o'clock sharp, there was a knock at the door. Her hands trembled as she reached for the knob, wondering if the man behind it would be, well, worth it. When she opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. The man standing there wasn't just attractive, he was breathtaking. He was tall, with dark hair, and those same deep blue eyes she'd seen in the photos on the website. But what took her breath away wasn't his looks. It was the genuine smile on his face, the kind of smile that seemed to reach all the way to his eyes. "Zara Williams," he said, his voice as warm as the summer breeze that was whipping through the open window. "I'm Daniel. Daniel Richardson." The only important detail was that Daniel loved Jillian beyond reason. The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither had she clicked before she could change her mind, her credit card information auto-filling the fields, like fate had already decided. The confirmation email arrived instantly. "Thank you for choosing Companion Plus. Your companion will contact you within 24 hours to arrange your experience." Zara closed the laptop and stared at her reflection in the black screen. She'd just spent money she couldn't afford on something she'd never imagined needing, but for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt anticipation. What do you think drives someone to seek paid companionship? Is it desperation, or could it be a form of self-care? Share your thoughts below. Daniel stared at the Companion Plus application on his personal laptop, the one Caroline didn't monitor, the one that existed in the small corner of his life that still belonged to him. He'd found the service through a series of late-night internet searches that started with authentic relationships and ended somewhere much more desperate. The irony wasn't lost on him, a billionaire signing up to be a paid companion. But that was exactly the point. For the first time in years, someone would spend time with him without knowing his net worth, without calculating what they could gain from the association. They'd hired him, not the other way around. He'd created a completely fabricated identity, David Chen, a freelance graphic designer struggling to make ends meet in the city. The backstory felt more honest than his real life. At least David's financial struggles were relatable human problems, not the golden cage of infinite wealth. The application process was surprisingly thorough. Background checks, references, thankfully money could buy convincing fake references, even a psychological evaluation disguised as a compatibility assessment. Daniel had answered every question as David, the man he might have been in another life. "Why are you interested in companion work?" "Because I want to remember what it feels like to matter to someone for who I am, not what I can provide," he'd written, then deleted it. Too honest. Instead, "I enjoy making people feel special and could use the extra income." Now, 3 days later, his phone buzzed with a notification from the service, his first assignment. Client, Zara W. Age, 27. Occupation, administrative assistant. Looking for someone genuine who can make her feel valued. Duration, weekend package. Special requests, just treat me like I matter. That last line hit him like a physical blow. Just treat me like I matter. When was the last time someone had said that to him? When was the last time he'd said it to someone else? Her photos showed a beautiful black woman with tired eyes and a smile that was fighting to exist. Something about her expression reminded him of his own reflection lately, the careful mask hiding a deep loneliness. David, had 2 hours to transform himself from a billionaire CEO into a struggling graphic designer. The physical transformation was easy enough to make: jeans instead of tailored suits, a simple button-down instead of silk ties, sneakers instead of Italian leather. But the emotional transformation required something more difficult: honesty. Zara changed her outfit 4 times before settling on a simple blue dress that made her feel almost pretty. That agreed to meet at Riverside Park, neutral ground where she could escape if this turned into the disaster she half expected. Her hands shook as she applied lipstick, the same shade she'd worn on her last real date 8 months ago. This isn't a real date, she reminded herself. This is a transaction. He's being paid to be nice to you. But as she walked to the park, she found herself hoping anyway. Hoping he'd be kind. Hoping she wouldn't feel pathetic. Hoping that for 48 hours she could pretend someone found her worth caring about. The park buzzed with Saturday afternoon energy, families having picnics, couples walking hand in hand, joggers pursuing their personal victories. Zara found their designated meeting spot, a bench near the fountain, and checked her phone. 5 minutes early, just like she'd planned. "Zara!" She turned at the sound of her name and forgot how to breathe. The man approaching her was nothing like she'd expected. Tall but not intimidating, with kind eyes and a smile that reached them. He wore jeans and a blue button-down that brought out his eyes, and when he extended his hand, she noticed calluses on his fingers. "David," he said, and his voice was warm honey over gravel. "It's so nice to meet you." His handshake lingered just long enough to feel genuine, and when he released her hand, she felt the absence of his touch like a small loss. "Hi," she managed, suddenly aware of every imperfection in her appearance. "Thank you for doing this." Something flickered across his expression. Surprise? Concern? "Thank you for trusting me with your weekend. Should we walk? I thought we could start with coffee and see where the conversation takes us." As they strolled through the park, Zara waited for the artificial feeling she'd expected, the obvious performance of paid affection. Instead, David asked her about her favorite spot in the city, listened intently to her answer, and shared his own story about discovering a hidden jazz club in the village. "You're not what I expected," she found herself saying as they settled at a small cafe overlooking the river. "What did you expect?" He leaned forward slightly, genuinely curious.
Someone more performative, I guess. Someone who felt like he was acting. Daniel's laugh was rueful. Maybe I'm just a really good actor. Are you? The question hung between them like a challenge. He met her eyes directly. With you? No. I don't think I could fake this even if I wanted to. The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. This was exactly what she'd paid for, someone who could make her feel special, but it didn't feel transactional. It felt real. Daniel hadn't expected this. He'd prepared himself to perform kindness, to manufacture charm, to provide the emotional service she'd purchased. But instead, he found himself genuinely drawn to this woman who blushed when she laughed and apologized for taking up space in the world. "Tell me about your job," he said, stirring his coffee more than necessary. Zara's expression dimmed. "It's nothing exciting. Administrative work. Filing, copying, making coffee for people who don't see me as human." That sounds soul-crushing. It is. She looked surprised by her own honesty. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't complain. You're not being paid to hear me whine about—" "Stop." The word came out sharper than he intended. "You're not paying me to pretend your feelings don't matter." She stared at him, something vulnerable and hopeful flickering in her eyes. "What am I paying you for, then?" The question should have been simple. He was there to be her companion, to provide the girlfriend experience, to make her feel valued for 48 hours. But looking at her across the small table, her guard slowly lowering, Daniel realized he didn't know anymore. "Maybe you're paying me to remember what it feels like."
Daniel considered lying, giving her the answer David, the struggling graphic designer, would give. Instead, he told her a truth that surprised them both. "I honestly can't remember." They walked along the river as the afternoon sun painted everything golden. Conversation flowed like they'd known each other for years instead of hours. Zara told him about her dreams of writing, the novel she'd started and abandoned 6 times, the fear that she wasn't talented enough to deserve success. "Fear is just imagination pointed in the wrong direction," David said, stopping to face her. "What if you're not talented enough? So what? What if you are talented enough and you never find out because you were too scared to try?" That's easy to say when you're not the one facing rejection. Who says I haven't faced rejection? His voice carried an edge of something deeper. Who says I'm not facing it right now, every day? What do you mean? David, looked out over the water, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes the hardest rejection is the kind you can't see. When people accept you, but not for who you really are. When they love an idea of you that has nothing to do with your actual heart. Zara studied his profile, sensing undercurrents she couldn't quite understand. That sounds lonely. It is. He turned to her then, and she saw something raw in his expression. What about you? What's the loneliest thing about your life? The question should have felt too personal, too intimate for a paid arrangement. Instead, it felt like exactly what she needed someone to ask. "Going to bed every night knowing that if I disappeared tomorrow, it would take weeks for anyone to notice," she said, the words escaping before she could stop them. "I would notice. You don't even know me. I know you apologize for taking up space. I know you dream of writing but are afraid you're not good enough. I know you ordered a salad because you think you don't deserve the pasta you actually want. I know you've been hurt by someone who made you feel small." His voice was gentle but certain. "I know you matter, Zara, and I know the world is a better place because you're in it." Tears pricked her eyes. When was the last time someone had seen her clearly? When had anyone looked past her circumstances to the person underneath? "Why are you really doing this, the companion thing? You could probably get real dates." David's smile was sad. "Maybe I'm tired of real dates that feel fake. Maybe I wanted to meet someone who was brave enough to ask for what they needed." Brave? This isn't brave. This is pathetic. Asking for connection in a disconnected world? That's the bravest thing I've heard all year.
They had dinner at a small Italian restaurant that felt like someone's grandmother's kitchen. David, she was starting to think of him as David, not her paid companion, ordered wine and pasta and insisted she get the chicken parmesan she'd been eyeing. "This feels like a real date," she said, twirling linguine around her fork. "What makes a date real?" he asked. "I don't know, mutual interest, the possibility of something more, not having a financial transaction as the foundation?" David set down his fork. "What if I told you the money doesn't matter to me?" "I'd say that's easy to claim when you're getting paid. What if I gave it back?" The offer hung between them like a dare. Zara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Why would you do that?" "Because this stopped being about money the moment you trusted me with your story." She stared at him, searching for the performance, the angle, the catch. Instead, she found only sincerity in his eyes. "I can't let you do that," she said finally. "I hired you. We have an agreement." "Then let's change the agreement." David reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Let me take you to dinner tomorrow night. A real dinner. No transaction, no service, just two people who found something unexpected." His hand was warm and steady over hers, and for a moment Zara let herself imagine what it would feel like to be chosen rather than purchased, to be wanted rather than hired. "What if this is just really good customer service?" she asked, trying to protect herself from hope. "What if it's not?" Have you ever wondered if genuine connection can grow from artificial beginnings? When does something transactional become something real? Let us know what you think in the comments. They walked back to her apartment building as the city settled into its evening rhythm. Streetlights cast warm pools on the sidewalk, and the distant sounds of traffic and conversation created an urban symphony around them. "Thank you," Zara said as they stopped in front of her building, "for today, for making me feel—" "How do you feel?" She considered the question seriously. "Seen, valued, like maybe I'm not as forgettable as I thought." "You're unforgettable, Zara." David stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive that didn't match his struggling graphic designer story. "Can I see you tomorrow?" "You mean, can you complete the weekend package you were hired for?" "I mean, can I take you somewhere special, because I can't imagine spending tomorrow with anyone else?" The distinction mattered, even if she couldn't explain why. This was still a paid arrangement, still artificial in its foundation, but something had shifted between them, something that felt dangerously like real affection. "Yes," she whispered, and when he smiled, she felt like she'd won something precious. David leaned down and kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender that it made her eyes water. "Sweet dreams, Zara. Tomorrow is going to be amazing." As she watched him disappear into the night, Zara realized she was in trouble. She'd hired someone to pretend to care about her, and somewhere in the space of 8 hours, she'd started to believe the pretense might be real. What she didn't know was that Daniel, David, was climbing into a car worth more than her annual salary, his heart racing with the same dangerous hope that was keeping her awake. For the first time in years, both of them fell asleep thinking about someone else than themselves.
The words felt like they belonged to someone else's life. How could he sit in a boardroom discussing million-dollar deals when all he could think about was the way Zara's eyes had lit up when she talked about her abandoned novel? Another text, this one from his brother Marcus. "Haven't heard from you in days. Everything okay?" Everything was the opposite of okay. Daniel was falling for a woman who didn't know his real name, let alone his real identity. A woman who'd hired him because she couldn't afford authentic companionship, while he sat on a fortune that could solve every problem in her life. "Fine," he typed gack, "just busy." With work or with that mysterious thing that's been making you smile lately? Daniel stared at the message. Was he that transparent? Even Marcus, who saw him maybe once a month, had noticed the change. "It's complicated," he replied. "The best things usually are." Across town, Zara stood in her cramped closet, holding up two dresses that both made her feel inadequate in different ways. David was taking her somewhere special tonight, and she had no idea what that meant or how to dress for it. More troubling than her wardrobe crisis was the flutter in her chest every time she thought about him. This was supposed to be simple, 48 hours of feeling valued, then back to reality. Instead, she'd spent the night replaying their conversations, analyzing every word for signs of genuine interest. "Don't be ridiculous," she told herself. "He's being paid to make you feel special. That's literally his job." But the way he'd looked at her when she talked about her writing dreams, that hadn't felt performative. The way he'd listened, really listened, when she'd shared her fears about being forgettable, that had felt real. Her phone rang, jolting her from her spiral. Maya's name flashed on the screen. "Girl, you didn't text me back last night. How was your rent-a-boyfriend adventure?" Zara sank onto her bed. "It was that good or that bad? Your silence is not encouraging." "Maya, what if it's real?" "What if what's real?" "What if he actually likes me? Like, genuinely likes me, not just because he's being paid to?" Maya's pause was loaded with concern. "Honey, you know what this is, right? He's a professional. Being likable is literally what you're paying him for." "I know that. Logically, I know that. But nothing. Zara, I love you, but you're vulnerable right now. You've been lonely, you're struggling financially, and this guy is giving you everything you've been craving. That's his job. Don't confuse good customer service with genuine feelings." The words hit like cold water, but Zara couldn't shake the memory of David's eyes when he'd said her name, the way his voice had changed when he talked about feeling rejected, about people accepting him for the wrong reasons. "What if you're wrong?" she asked quietly. "Then I hope I am. But Zara, protect your heart, okay? This thing has an expiration date." After Maya hung up, Zara stared at her reflection in the mirror. Maya was right. She was vulnerable, desperate for connection, probably reading meaning into gestures that were just good acting. But knowing that didn't make the hope go away. She chose the blue dress, the one that made her feel almost pretty, and tried not to think about what would happen when the weekend ended. Daniel waited outside the Met Museum of Art, checking his phone for the third time in 2 minutes. He'd chosen the location carefully, somewhere beautiful and cultured, but not so expensive that it would raise questions about David Chen's budget. When he saw Zara walking toward him, everything else faded into background noise. She wore a blue dress that complemented her skin tone perfectly, and she'd done something different with her hair that made it catch the late afternoon light. But it was her smile, tentative but genuine, that made his chest tight. "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it more than any compliment he had ever given. "Thank you." She touched her hair self-consciously. "I wasn't sure what somewhere special meant." "It means anywhere I get to spend time with you." The words came out before he could stop them, too honest, too revealing for someone who was supposed to be providing a service. Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, pleasure, and underneath it all, a careful wariness that reminded him she was protecting herself, too. "Shall we?" He offered his arm, and when she took it, the simple contact sent electricity up his spine. They wandered through the galleries, their conversation flowing around art and life and dreams deferred. Daniel found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone, about feeling isolated despite being surrounded by people, about the weight of expectations, about wondering if anyone would care about him if he lost everything tomorrow. He told these stories as David, the struggling graphic designer, but every word was truth dressed in different clothes. "You sound like you understand what it's like to feel invisible,"
Zara said, as they stood in front of a painting of a lone figure in a crowded street. Don't we all feel invisible sometimes? He deflected. Some more than others. She was quiet for a moment, studying the painting. Can I ask you something? His heart rate spiked. Of course. Yesterday, when you said people accept you for the wrong reasons, what did you mean? The question was a trap, disguised as intimacy, and Daniel felt the walls of his deception closing in. How could he explain without revealing everything? I meant, sometimes people see what they want to see. They fall in love with an idea of you that doesn't match who you really are. And then you're stuck maintaining this version of yourself that isn't authentic, because you're afraid if they saw the real you, they'd leave. Zara turned to face him fully. What's the real you like? Lonely, guilty, falling in love with a woman who doesn't know my name. Complicated, I said instead. I like complicated. Do you? Or do you like the simple version I'm showing you? The question hung between them like a challenge. Zara stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. What if I told you I'd rather have complicated and real than simple and fake? Daniel's resolve cracked a little further. What if the real version disappointed you? What if it didn't? They were standing too close now, the space between them charged with possibility and danger. He could smell her perfume, something light and floral that made him think of spring mornings. One step forward, and he could kiss her, could stop pretending this was just a job, could... David, a voice cut through the moment like a blade. Daniel froze. He knew that voice, had heard it in board meetings and charity galas and expensive restaurants across the city. Slowly, he turned to see Victoria Ashworth, socialite and wife of Richardson Industries' biggest investor, standing 10 feet away with her husband Harold. David Chen? Victoria's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose in surprise. I thought that was you. What are you doing here? Daniel's mind raced. Victoria knew him as Daniel Richardson, billionaire CEO. She'd never heard the name David Chen in her life. She was testing him, probably trying to figure out why he was dressed down and standing in a museum with a woman who clearly wasn't from their social circle.
"I'm sorry, I think you have me confused with someone else," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the panic racing through his veins. Victoria's smile turned predatory. "Oh, my mistake. You just look remarkably like someone I know. Have a lovely evening." As she walked away, Harold glanced back once, his expression curious. Daniel knew he had maybe 24 hours before Victoria's gossip network identified Zara and started asking questions about Daniel Richardson's mysterious companion. "Friend of yours?" Zara asked, her voice carefully neutral. "No," Daniel said, technically truthful. Victoria was an acquaintance, a fixture in his world of obligation and appearance. She mistook me for someone else. But he could see the questions in Zara's eyes, the way she'd noticed his momentary panic, the expensive watch he'd forgotten to take off, the way he'd held himself when faced with someone from his real life. "Ready for dinner?" he asked, desperate to change the subject. "Sure," she said, but something had shifted between them. A new tension, a crack in the foundation he'd built as David Chen. They went to a small Ethiopian restaurant in the village, the kind of place Daniel had never been to in his real life, but that David Chen might frequent. The injera bread and spiced lentils were a revelation, but Daniel could barely taste the food. All his attention was focused on Zara, on the careful way she was watching him now. "You seem different," she said, tearing off a piece of bread. "Do I?" "More guarded, like you're hiding something." "I'm hiding everything." "Some things, but not from people we care about." The words hit him like a physical blow. People we care about. When had that happened? When had this stopped being a performance and started being something that mattered? "Zara," he started, then stopped. What could he say? That he was lying about everything except his feelings for her? That he was a billionaire pretending to be broke because he wanted her to care about him for himself? That he was falling in love with her and terrified she'd hate him when she learned the truth? "What is it?" she asked gently. "What if I told you that everything about my life was about to change?" he said carefully. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if the life I'd been living isn't sustainable anymore? What if I have to make some hard choices about who I really am and what I really want?" Zara reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Then I'd say change is scary, but sometimes necessary, and I'd say you don't have to face it alone." The simple gesture, the warmth in her voice, the way she offered support without hesitation, it broke something open in Daniel's chest. This woman, who could barely afford rent, was offering him to help him through a crisis she didn't understand. This woman who'd hired companionship because she felt invisible was seeing him more clearly than anyone ever had. "What if you found out I wasn't who you thought I was?" he asked, the question barely above a whisper. "What if you found out I was exactly who you thought I was, but that was enough?" Her answer was so generous, so trusting that Daniel felt the full weight of his deception crushing down on him. He deserved honesty. He deserved someone who wouldn't lie to her about something as basic as his name. But she also deserved someone who wouldn't disappear from her life in a cloud of scandal and media attention, someone whose world wouldn't swallow her whole and spit her out broken. "Zara," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes? Whatever happens, I need you to know that meeting you has been the most real thing that's happened to me in years." Something in his tone made her squeeze his hand tighter. "That sounds like goodbye." "It's not goodbye. It's me trying to figure out how to be honest without losing you. You won't lose me by being honest." "Won't I?" Daniel thought. "What happens when you find out David Chen doesn't exist? What happens when you realize you've been falling for a lie? When someone you care about is hiding their true identity, is it the deception that matters most, or the feelings behind it? What would you do in Zara's situation? Share your thoughts below. They walked back to her apartment in loaded silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The evening had started with promise and ended with uncertainty, the shadow of unspoken truths hanging between them. "Will you see me tomorrow?" Zara asked, as they stopped in front of her building. "Do you want to?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Whatever's going on with you, whatever you're struggling with, I meant what I said. You don't have to face it alone." "Will you change your mind about that?" he said quietly. "Try me." He leaned down and kissed her forehead again, but this time it felt like benediction and apology combined. "Sweet dreams, Zara." And as he walked away, Daniel pulled out his phone and scrolled to Victoria Ashworth's contact information. He needed to know what she suspected, needed to buy himself time to figure out how to tell Zara the truth without destroying everything they'd built. But when Victoria answered on the first ring, her voice was silk over steel. "Daniel Richardson, how fascinating to see you playing dress-up today. Tell me, does your little friend know she's dating one of the richest men in the city?" The question hit him like a sledgehammer. Victoria knew exactly who he was, probably known from the moment she'd spotted him. Worse, she was the kind of person who collected secrets like trophies and used them as weapons. "What do you want, Victoria?" "Nothing at all. I just think it's interesting, that's all. A billionaire CEO pretending to be, what was it, David Chen? How delightfully scandalous. I do hope your girlfriend appreciates the performance." The threat was clear even though unspoken. Victoria could destroy everything with a single well-placed phone call to the right gossip columnist. Daniel's secret relationship would become tabloid fodder, and Zara would be thrust into a spotlight she never asked for. "Leave her out of this," Daniel said, his voice deadly quiet. "Oh, I intend to. For now. But secrets have a way of coming out, don't they? Especially when they're this entertaining." The line went dead, leaving Daniel staring at his phone in the middle of the sidewalk. Victoria's message was clear. She owned his secret now, and she'd use it whenever it served her purposes. Time was running out. He had to tell Zara the truth before someone else did. But how do you confess to someone that everything they think they know about you is a lie? How do you ask someone to love the real you when the real you comes with a world of complications they never signed up for?
"I'm sorry, I think you have me confused with someone else," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the panic racing through his veins. Victoria's smile turned predatory. "Oh, my mistake. You just look remarkably like someone I know. Have a lovely evening." As she walked away, Harold glanced back once, his expression curious. Daniel knew he had maybe 24 hours before Victoria's gossip network identified Zara and started asking questions about Daniel Richardson's mysterious companion. "Friend of yours?" Zara asked, her voice carefully neutral. "No," Daniel said, technically truthful. Victoria was an acquaintance, a fixture in his world of obligation and appearance. She mistook me for someone else. But he could see the questions in Zara's eyes, the way she'd noticed his momentary panic, the expensive watch he'd forgotten to take off, the way he'd held himself when faced with someone from his real life. "Ready for dinner?" he asked, desperate to change the subject. "Sure," she said, but something had shifted between them. A new tension, a crack in the foundation he'd built as David Chen. They went to a small Ethiopian restaurant in the village, the kind of place Daniel had never been to in his real life, but that David Chen might frequent. The injera bread and spiced lentils were a revelation, but Daniel could barely taste the food. All his attention was focused on Zara, on the careful way she was watching him now. "You seem different," she said, tearing off a piece of bread. "Do I?" "More guarded, like you're hiding something." "I'm hiding everything." "Some things, but not from people we care about." The words hit him like a physical blow. People we care about. When had that happened? When had this stopped being a performance and started being something that mattered? "Zara," he started, then stopped. What could he say? That he was lying about everything except his feelings for her? That he was a billionaire pretending to be broke because he wanted her to care about him for himself? That he was falling in love with her and terrified she'd hate him when she learned the truth? "What is it?" she asked gently. "What if I told you that everything about my life was about to change?" he said carefully. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if the life I'd been living isn't sustainable anymore? What if I have to make some hard choices about who I really am and what I really want?" Zara reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "Then I'd say change is scary, but sometimes necessary, and I'd say you don't have to face it alone." The simple gesture, the warmth in her voice, the way she offered support without hesitation, it broke something open in Daniel's chest. This woman, who could barely afford rent, was offering him to help him through a crisis she didn't understand. This woman who'd hired companionship because she felt invisible was seeing him more clearly than anyone ever had. "What if you found out I wasn't who you thought I was?" he asked, the question barely above a whisper. "What if you found out I was exactly who you thought I was, but that was enough?" Her answer was so generous, so trusting that Daniel felt the full weight of his deception crushing down on him. He deserved honesty. He deserved someone who wouldn't lie to her about something as basic as his name. But she also deserved someone who wouldn't disappear from her life in a cloud of scandal and media attention, someone whose world wouldn't swallow her whole and spit her out broken. "Zara," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes? Whatever happens, I need you to know that meeting you has been the most real thing that's happened to me in years." Something in his tone made her squeeze his hand tighter. "That sounds like goodbye." "It's not goodbye. It's me trying to figure out how to be honest without losing you." "You won't lose me by being honest." "Won't I?" Daniel thought. "What happens when you find out David Chen doesn't exist? What happens when you realize you've been falling for a lie? When someone you care about is hiding their true identity, is it the deception that matters most, or the feelings behind it? What would you do in Zara's situation? Share your thoughts below. They walked back to her apartment in loaded silence, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The evening had started with promise and ended with uncertainty, the shadow of unspoken truths hanging between them. "Will you see me tomorrow?" Zara asked,
as they stopped in front of her building. "Do you want to?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Whatever's going on with you, whatever you're struggling with, I meant what I said. You don't have to face it alone." "Will you change your mind about that?" he said quietly. "Try me." He leaned down and kissed her forehead again, but this time it felt like benediction and apology combined. "Sweet dreams, Zara." And as he walked away, Daniel pulled out his phone and scrolled to Victoria Ashworth's contact information. He needed to know what she suspected, needed to buy himself time to figure out how to tell Zara the truth without destroying everything they'd built. But when Victoria answered on the first ring, her voice was silk over steel. "Daniel Richardson, how fascinating to see you playing dress-up today. Tell me, does your little friend know she's dating one of the richest men in the city?" The question hit him like a sledgehammer. Victoria knew exactly who he was, probably known from the moment she'd spotted him. Worse, she was the kind of person who collected secrets like trophies and used them as weapons. "What do you want, Victoria?" "Nothing at all. I just think it's interesting, that's all. A billionaire CEO pretending to be, what was it, David Chen? How delightfully scandalous. I do hope your girlfriend appreciates the performance." The threat was clear even though unspoken. Victoria could destroy everything with a single well-placed phone call to the right gossip columnist. Daniel's secret relationship would become tabloid fodder, and Zara would be thrust into a spotlight she never asked for. "Leave her out of this," Daniel said, his voice deadly quiet. "Oh, I intend to, for now. But secrets have a way of coming out, don't they? Especially when they're this entertaining." The line went dead, leaving Daniel staring at his phone in the middle of the sidewalk. Victoria's message was clear. She owned his secret now, and she'd use it whenever it served her purposes. Time was running out. He had to tell Zara the truth before someone else did. But how do you confess to someone that everything they think they know about you is a lie? How do you ask someone to love the real you when the real you comes with a world of complications they never signed up for?
The rawness in his voice almost broke her resolve. Almost. But the photos on her phone screen, Daniel Richardson in his real world, surrounded by luxury she couldn't imagine, reminded her of the gulf between them. "I can't do this," she said. "I can't be part of whatever this is." "Zara, wait." She hung up and immediately blocked his number. Then she sat on her bed, surrounded by the evidence of his deception, and cried for the man she'd thought she was falling in love with, a man who'd never existed at all. Daniel stared at his phone. The call ended, knowing he'd lost her. But he couldn't leave it like this. He couldn't let her think this had all been a game to him, that her feelings hadn't mattered. He drove to her apartment building, parking the modest sedan that now felt like another lie. The doorman looked at him suspiciously. Word was probably already spreading about who he really was. "I need to see Zara Williams," he said. "She's not taking visitors. Please, just tell her David is here." The doorman's expression shifted, recognition followed by something like disgust. "You mean Daniel Richardson? Yeah, she told me about you. She said if you showed up, I should call the police." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He'd lost her, completely, irrevocably lost her. Could you give her this?" He pulled out an envelope he'd prepared, his handwriting shaky across the front. "Please." The doorman took the envelope reluctantly. "I'll give it to her, but if you come back here, I'm calling the cops." Daniel nodded and walked back to his car, feeling like he was walking to his own execution. He'd ruined everything, the one real thing in his life, and he'd destroyed it with his lies. Zara stared at the envelope the doorman had brought up, her name written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. She'd thrown away the first letter he'd tried to give her, but something about this one felt different, final. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a check for $400, the exact amount she'd paid for his services. "Zara, I know you never want to see me again, and I understand why. I know my explanation won't change anything, but I need you to know the truth. I registered with the service because I was drowning in a life that felt empty. Everyone who spends time with me wants something. my money, my connections, my influence. I thought if I could meet someone who didn't know about any of that, maybe I could remember what it felt like to be valued for myself. I never expected to fall in love with you. I know you think our entire relationship was a lie, but that's not true. The feelings were real. The connection was real. My name was fake, my job was fake, but the way I felt when you trusted me with your dreams, that was the most real thing I've ever experienced. I kept lying because I was terrified of losing you. I told myself I was protecting you from my world, but really, I was protecting myself from the possibility that you might not want me without the pretense. I'm sorry I made you feel pathetic. I'm sorry I made you question your worth. You are extraordinary, Zara. You are kind and brave and brilliant, and you deserve someone who can love you without conditions or complications. I'm not that person. I wish I could be, but I can't change who I am, or the world I live in. I can only try to make sure you never have to deal with the consequences of my selfishness. I've told my PR team to kill the story. Your name won't be released, your privacy won't be invaded. You can go back to your life without any interference from mine. Please don't think less of yourself because of what I did. You asked for connection, and that took courage. That you opened your heart to me, even briefly, is a gift I'll never forget. I love you. That's the only truth that matters. Daniel. P.S. I've transferred $50,000 to your account, not as payment or charity, but because you deserve to write your novel without worrying about rent. You have a story to tell, and the world needs to hear it. Zara read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of pain and sincerity. She wanted to tear it up, to maintain her anger, to keep him as the villain in her story. But the rawness of his words, the way he'd seen straight through to her deepest fears and insecurities, made that impossible. He'd lied about everything except the one thing that mattered most, his feelings for her. She checked her bank account, hardly believing it was real, but there it was, a deposit that would change her life, free her from the crushing weight of financial desperation, give her the chance to pursue her dreams. Not as payment or charity, but because you deserved to write your novel. Zara sank onto her couch, the letter trembling in her hands. She'd been so focused on the deception that she'd almost missed the deeper truth. Daniel Richardson, billionaire CEO, had seen something in her worth saving. Not just her feelings, but her potential. Her phone rang. Maya, again. "Are you okay?" Maya asked immediately. "I don't know," Zara admitted. He wrote me a letter." "What did it say?" Zara read it out loud, her voice breaking on the last few lines. When she finished, Maya was quiet for a long moment. "Damn," Maya said finally. "That's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard, or the most elaborate manipulation in history." "I think it's both. What are you gonna do?" Zara looked at the check in her hand, then at the letter, with its painful honesty. "I don't know. I'm so angry at him for lying, but I'm also... Also what? Also heartbroken that he thought he had to lie to be loved. When someone you love has betrayed your trust, how do you separate the deception from the feelings behind it? Is it possible to forgive a lie that was told out of fear rather than malice? What would you do? Let us know in the comments. Daniel sat in his office, staring out at the city he'd conquered but never truly inhabited. The board meeting had been a disaster. Lectures about reputation management, demands for explanations he couldn't give, threats about stock prices and shareholder confidence. He'd resigned on the spot. "Mr. Richardson," Carolyn had said, after the board members filed out in stunned silence, "did you just resign from your own company?" "I did." "Sir, you can't just..." "I can, and I did. Marcus can run the company. He's always been better with people anyway." Now, 3 hours later, Daniel felt lighter than he had in years. He'd spent his entire adult life building an empire that had become his prison. Walking away from it felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at Riverside Park, the bench where we first met. Zara. Daniel stared at the message, hardly daring to hope. Zara wanted to see him. She'd gotten his letter and she wanted to see him.
He ran to the park like his life depended on it, because maybe it did. Zara sat on the bench where they'd first met, Daniel's letter folded in her hands. She'd been there for 20 minutes, watching people live their lives, trying to figure out what she wanted to say to him. When she saw him approaching, still David to her eyes, but now carrying the weight of his real identity, her heart hammered against her ribs. He looked different somehow, more vulnerable, more real than he'd ever been. "You came," he said, sitting beside her but leaving careful space between them. "I got your letter." "I meant every word." Zara turned to face him, studying his features as if seeing them for the first time. "Who are you, really? Not Daniel Richardson, the CEO, not David Chen, the graphic designer. Who are you?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "I'm someone who's been so afraid of being alone that I forgot how to be authentic. I'm someone who had everything except the one thing that mattered. I'm someone who fell in love with a woman brave enough to ask for what she needed, and then was too much of a coward to give her the same honesty." "I keep thinking about something you said," Zara said quietly. "About people accepting you for the wrong reasons. About being stuck, maintaining a version of yourself that isn't authentic." "What about it?" "You weren't just talking about other people, were you? You were talking about yourself, about how you'd been living a lie for so long you forgot who you really were." Daniel's throat tightened. "Yes. The question is, who do you want to be now?" The question hung between them like a bridge they could either cross or burn. Daniel looked at this woman who'd seen through his deception to the lonely man underneath, who'd offered him forgiveness he didn't deserve, who'd challenged him to be better than he'd ever been. "I want to be someone worthy of you," he said simply. "You don't have to be worthy of me. You just have to be honest with me. Can you forgive me?" Zara was quiet for a long moment, watching the fountain spray water into the evening air. She said, "I can forgive you for lying, but I need to know, if we do this, if we try to make this real, it has to be completely real. No more pretense, no more performance. Just us. Just us." Daniel agreed. "That means dealing with the fact that you're a billionaire and I'm a secretary. That means navigating a world I don't understand, media attention I never asked for, people who will think I'm only with you for your money." "I resign today," Daniel said quietly. "What?" "From the company. I'm done living someone else's life. I want to figure out who I am when I'm not performing the role of CEO." Zara stared at him. "You resigned from a billion-dollar company?" "I resigned from a prison that looked like success. There's a difference." "What will you do?" "I don't know. Maybe I'll take that graphic design course for real. Maybe I'll travel. Maybe I'll write. You're not the only one with stories to tell." He turned to face her fully. "What I won't do is let fear make my decisions anymore." "What about your money, your lifestyle?" "I'll always have more than I need, but I don't need the empire. I don't need the performance. I just need—" "What?" "You," he said simply. "If you'll have me. The real me, whoever that turns out to be." Zara felt tears prick her eyes. This was what she'd been afraid to hope for. Not just love, but the kind of love that inspired transformation, that made people brave enough to become their best selves. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I." "What if we don't work? What if the real world is too complicated for us?" "Then we'll figure it out together. Or we'll fail together. But either way, we'll be honest about it."
Zara looked at this man who'd torn down his carefully constructed life because he'd learned something true about himself, who'd walked away from everything that had defined him because he'd realized it wasn't who he wanted to be. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay? Okay, let's try this. The real version. No more lies, no more pretense, just us." "Just us," Daniel agreed. When he kissed her, it tasted like honesty and hope and the kind of love that changes everything. It tasted like the beginning of something real. 6 months later. Zara sat in her new apartment, not luxurious, but bright and spacious enough for a proper writing desk by the window, staring at the email that had just changed her life again. "Dear Miss Williams, thank you for submitting Invisible Hearts to our literary agency. We are thrilled to offer you representation and believe your novel has tremendous commercial and literary potential. Your exploration of authentic connection in a disconnected world is both timely and deeply moving. Please call at your earliest convenience to discuss next steps. Best regards, Jennifer Martinez, Martinez Literary Agency." "Daniel," she called out, her voice cracking with excitement and disbelief. He appeared in the doorway of her kitchen, their kitchen, really, since he'd been staying over most nights for the past 3 months, wearing an apron covered in flour and a smile that still made her heart skip. "What is it?" he asked, immediately picking up on her excitement. "They want to represent me," she said, holding up her phone like evidence of a miracle. "The literary agency. They want to represent my book." Daniel's face lit up with pure joy, the kind of unguarded happiness she'd learned was his most authentic expression. He crossed the room in 3 strides and swept her into a spinning hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "I knew it," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "I knew from the moment you told me about your dreams that you had something special to share with the world. You believed in me before I believed in myself. You just needed someone to see what was already there."
Good. Terrifying, but good. Daniel's hands found the knots in her feet, a side effect of long writing sessions, and began working them out with practiced ease. "The contractor says we'll be ready for a soft opening in 6 weeks. Zara watched his face as he talked about the restaurant he was opening in Brooklyn. Nothing fancy, just honest food served by people who cared about what they were doing. It was so different from the corporate empire he'd walked away from, but it suited him in ways the CEO role never had. "Any regrets?" she asked, as she did sometimes when he looked particularly thoughtful. "About leaving Richardson Industries? Never." His answer was immediate and certain. "Marcus is doing a better job running it than I ever did. He actually enjoys the strategic planning and board meetings. Me, I like feeding people. I like the immediate feedback of seeing someone enjoy a meal I helped create." Who would have thought? Daniel Richardson, restaurateur. "David Chen, restaurateur," he corrected with a smile. "I legally changed my name last month, remember? David Richardson Chen. I kept both names. I'm not running from who I was, but I'm not pretending David wasn't real either." It had been his idea to take the name he'd created for their first meeting and make it legally part of his identity. "David was the version of me that was brave enough to fall in love with you," he'd explained. "I don't want to lose him." "We should celebrate," David said, still massaging her feet. "Your book deal, my restaurant progress, the fact that we've successfully navigated 6 months of real life without any major disasters." "What did you have in mind?" "There's this new Ethiopian place in the village." Zara laughed. "You mean the place we went on our second date, the one that's not actually new?" "It's new to me every time I go there with you." His expression grew more serious. "Besides, I have something I want to ask you there." Something in his tone made Zara's heart rate spike. "What kind of something?" "The kind of something that's better asked in the place where I first realized I was completely, irrevocably in love with you." 2 hours later, they sat in the same booth at the same Ethiopian restaurant, sharing the same dishes they'd ordered that first night when they were still learning to trust each other. But everything was different now.
the ease between them, the way David's hand rested casually over hers on the table, the way conversation flowed without the undercurrent of secrets. "Remember what you asked me that first night here?" David said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Which part? I asked you a lot of things." "You asked me what made a date real." Zara smiled at the memory. "And you asked me what if the money didn't matter." "I've been thinking about that question a lot lately, about what makes something real versus what makes it transactional." "And what conclusion did you reach?" He shifted in his seat, and Zara noticed his free hand was fidgeting with something in his pocket. "I think something becomes real when both people choose it freely, when there's nothing either person needs from the other except their presence." "That's a good definition. Which brings me to my question." David's voice was steady, but Zara could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the way he was trying to project calm while his heart hammered visibly in the pulse point of his throat. He pulled his hand from his pocket, and Zara's breath caught as she saw the small velvet box. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Zara Williams," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple, beautiful, solitaire diamond that caught the restaurant's warm light and threw it back in scattered rainbows. "6 months ago, you paid me $400 to pretend to care about you. Tonight, I'm asking if you'll let me spend the rest of my life caring about you for real." Tears pricked Zara's eyes as she stared at the ring, at this man who'd upended his entire existence because loving her had taught him who he really wanted to be. "The ring is too much?" she asked, because even after 6 months, sometimes the reality of his resources still overwhelmed her. "It's perfect for you. Not too flashy, not trying to prove anything, just beautiful and real and exactly right." He paused, studying her face. "But if you hate it, we can—" "I love it. I love you. Yes, obviously yes." David's smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly. It fit perfectly, which shouldn't have surprised her. He'd always paid attention to details about her that she barely noticed herself. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked, admiring the way the diamond looked on her hand. "About 10 minutes after I met you. I just had to figure out how to become someone worthy of asking." "You were always worthy. You just had to learn to see it." "We both did." They walked home through the city streets, hands interlocked, Zara's engagement ring catching streetlights and store windows. She felt like she was floating, like the happiness inside her chest was too big for her body to contain. "Can I ask you something?" she said as they paused at a crosswalk. "Anything." "That first day in the park, when you were David Chen, the struggling graphic designer, were you nervous?" "Terrified," he admitted immediately. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd never been in a situation where someone might reject the real me instead of just my money. And now? Now I know that the real me is someone you choose to love every day. Someone who makes you laugh, someone who supports your dreams, someone who's learning to be brave because you taught me how. The crosswalk signal changed, but neither of them moved. "I have something to confess," Zara said quietly. "What is it?" "I knew." "Knew what?" "Not at first, but by the second day, I suspected you weren't who you said you were. The expensive watch you forgot to take off, the way you carried yourself, the fact that you knew which wine to order at dinner but claimed to be struggling financially. You knew I was lying?" "I suspected, but I also knew that whoever you really were, the feelings between us were real. So I chose to trust the feelings instead of worrying about the details." "You are extraordinary. Do you know that?" "I'm learning to believe it." "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of our lives making sure you never forget it."
1 year later. Zara stood at the podium in the bookstore, looking out at the crowd of people who'd come to hear her read From Invisible Hearts. The novel had been published 3 months ago to critical acclaim and surprising commercial success. Apparently, she wasn't the only person who'd felt invisible in the modern world.
The thing about feeling invisible, she read from the final chapter, is that it's often a choice. We make ourselves small because we're afraid of taking up space we think we don't deserve. But everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves to matter. Sometimes you just need one person to recognize your worth before you can recognize it yourself. In the back of the crowd, David caught her eye and smiled. He'd closed the restaurant early so his entire staff could attend her reading. This family of cooks and servers and dishwashers who'd become as much a part of their life as breathing. After the reading, during the book signing, a young woman approached her table with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," the woman said simply. "I've been feeling invisible for so long, I almost forgot I existed. Your book reminded me that I matter." "You do matter," Zara said, signing the woman's book. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As the crowd dispersed, David appeared beside her, helping pack up the remaining books. "How does it feel, seeing your words affect people like that?" he asked. "Like I found my purpose," Zara said honestly. "Like all those years of feeling invisible were leading me to this, to being able to help other people feel seen. That's the most beautiful kind of transformation." They drove home together through the city they'd both learned to inhabit authentically, past the park where they'd first met, past the museum where their worlds had started to collide, past all the places that had been part of their journey from deception to truth. "Any regrets?" Zara asked, echoing the question she'd asked him months ago. "Only one," David said, his tone serious. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me 32 years to figure out who I really was. Think of all the time we could have had together if I'd been braver sooner." "But if you'd been braver sooner, you would have been a different person, and I might have been a different person too. Maybe we needed to go through everything we went through to become the people who could love each other this well." David considered this as they pulled into their driveway, the small house in Queens they'd bought together, nothing fancy, but filled with the kind of happiness that money couldn't purchase. "I probably should be braver, but I still want to make up for lost time. We have the rest of our lives for that. Promise?" "I promise." Later that night, as they lay in bed with Zara's head on David's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate moment when she'd hovered over the confirm payment button to this moment of perfect contentment, everything had been leading to this. "David," she said softly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me that love doesn't have a price tag, that connection can't be bought or sold, only freely given and received. Thank you for teaching me that the most valuable things in life are the ones that can't be purchased." "What we have is priceless," Zara said, lifting her head to look at him. "What we have is real," David corrected gently. "Finally, completely real." Outside their window, the city hummed with the lives of millions of people, each searching for connection, for meaning, for someone to see them clearly. But inside their small house, two people who'd found each other through a tangle of loneliness and lies had discovered something true. That authentic love transforms everything it touches, turning isolation into intimacy, fear into courage, and strangers into soulmates. Zara fell asleep with David's arms around her and her engagement ring catching moonlight from the window, dreaming of all the tomorrows they'd have together, not as a billionaire and a secretary, not as David Chen and his client, but as two people who'd learned that the most beautiful love stories begin with the courage to be real. The greatest love stories aren't about perfect people finding each other. They're about flawed people choosing to grow into their best selves together. What do you think makes a relationship truly authentic?
Have you ever had to choose between comfortable lies and difficult truths? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know, what would you be willing to change about yourself for love? In the end, Zara Williams learned that she'd never been invisible after all. She'd just been waiting for the right person to help her see her own light. And Daniel Richardson discovered that the most valuable acquisition of his life wasn't a company or a fortune, but the heart of a woman who loved him not for what he could give her, but for who he chose to become. Sometimes the best investments are the ones that can't be measured in dollars and cents, but in laughter shared, tears comforted, and dreams built together. Sometimes the most successful mergers aren't between companies, but between two souls brave enough to choose authentic love over safe loneliness. And sometimes, just sometimes, a $400 transaction can lead to something priceless, a love story worth more than all the money in the world.